Today we have part 3 of our deep dive into G.I. Joe's Eco Warriors with Chris Murray of Joe Declassified. If you've missed parts 1 and 2, we've already covered all the figures released in the United States from 1991. So let's start today by looking at some things that were cancelled. The Arbco Refinery. You know this one so well that I definitely want to hear from you on this one.
So this is active chemicals for active people. It's a great playset. It's so much fun. This concept was created by Bill Young. He was a vehicle designer at Hasbro. It's dated March 12th, 1990. This particular piece of art, I believe, was actually sold at the Christie's auction in 1994, where Hasbro sold a bunch of their pre-production material to raise money for the Children's Hospital there in Providence. I believe this art only sold for $60. This art's large. It's like 33 by 29. It's one of the largest pieces of art I personally ever owned. I don't own it anymore, unfortunately. But it has 8 play features. The first one was considered the extraction vat, and this separates glowing rocks from the rest of the slime. The child would have pushed down on the pump feature in the compressor unit that would have blown air into the vat to help separate the rocks from the slime. Looks like air would have just caused it to bubble. So it's just a play feature. The slime would then ooze out of the bottom into the canister, so the canister could then be taken and be used later. Up in the hopper at the top would have been the glow-in-the-dark rocks. The thing at the bottom was going to be a toxic drums, catch filtered slime residue. This allows the kids to transport the slime to the slime cannons and help keep it off the carpet. There was a compressor unit. It forced rammed air into the vat, making the slime bubble and writhe. There were walkways that linked the stations together, and they can break away for full tilt action play.
Like recreate the origin of Cesspool.
Exactly. There was a spintrofuge, so the rocks left in the vat moved to the spintrofuge to be cleaned of all remaining slime. Also, it could be used to clean figures after a battle. You could actually dump figures in there. And it had a hand crank that the child would crank to spin the blade at the bottom to cause the water inside to swirl. It's kind of like a jacuzzi for your figures. It lets your cobras relax at the end of a slimy battle. There would have also been a tool compartment on the flat part below the spintrofuge. But when you look at that container the figures could go in, that right there is actually the center of the Toxo lab that we did get. The Energizer, it charges light absorbent rocks in central laser chamber to power them up for fuel and weapons.
Well, I'm sure parents would have been delighted at the fact that not only were you now getting slime on the carpet and the furniture, but we were launching the slime, and prior to launching it, we're going to do that all in the dark.
I know, that's the best part. It's like, we're doing it in the dark, just randomly shooting it. Don't even know where it's going because we're hoping to see it glow. Back on point. So it's going to be a battery operated flashlight to charge up the glow in the dark rocks. Stickers would have said extreme voltage on it, but basically the chunks, the glow in the dark rocks, were just phosphorescent, and you could just make them shine brighter like you do any of the glow in the dark paint features like on other toys. The next play feature was called the interpumper. It circulates charged fluid between the plugs, allowing it to hook up to mobile points. And basically, we think that it was just those hoses were sealed, and it had like glow in the dark material in it. So as you're pumping it, it could like flex or glow or something. Nothing actually came out. It just circulated through those hoses. And then lastly, it was going to come with sludge guns. This is my favorite one because the write-up says, working slime firing guns protect the refinery from whale-watching do-gooders. So those damn environmentalists always trying to stop pollution. Talking with former Hasbro employees about this art, they all remembered that it was a fun piece and they remember joking around about it. No one remembers there actually being a model of this toy being made, that it only was a piece of art.
So sad.
Yeah, and that memo that we talked about earlier that was sent to Larry Hama, it actually had listed Cobra Refinery. Stations 2 and 3 have been altered. Their functions will be determined shortly. Refinery is headquarters for Cobra Group. And then in the comic book, right here, we can see an offshore refinery that actually has a bunch of these play features on it.
Yeah, I think that something that probably people were probably watching this thinking is, no, the Toxo Lab came out, and a lot of this was canceled, but keep in mind, the Toxo Lab came out in 1992. This was being pitched for 1991.
The main reason this toy was canceled is they were scheduled to make like a $20 toy for that year. And the cost on this would have retailed at over $50. You can go to 3D Joe's and you can listen to the like hour and a half, 2 hour long podcast that we went discussing in minute detail everything about this with me and like 5 other people, including Gary Head. So the Joe Declassified podcast, I believe all 9 of them are actually hosted on 3D Joe's on the pre-pro section. And we did a 2 hour presentation on this one art by itself.
Okay, and then that wasn't the only thing that was mentioned in that memo to Larry Hama as well, right?
We basically are doing this in like chronological order, and this particular stuff kind of needed to be at the end. But the original concept for the Eco Warriors is they were not going to shoot water, they were going to shoot slime. You know, each of those figures probably would have come with a small, like 1 ounce can. And then after you played with it one time, you would then want to buy more. So this was going to be the 5 ounce refill can. Talking with Vinny, we specifically asked him if there were any working models for any of this stuff. And Vinny said, as far as the slime missile launchers, the slime launching water guns, all that stuff, they could not get it to work. That's when they went the other way with water and they used the color changing ink. Next, actually, is something fun. Right after the slime, we found something called the toxic time bombs.
That's right. Much like you will be watching, hopefully, Philip's video on the septic tank after this is all done, I also have done a video on the toxic time bombs, and I thought that it would be fun to just demonstrate what the toxic time bombs were going to do to kind of entice you to go into the deep dive that I already did. Did you watch this already?
No.
No. Watch this.
Oh, no, you didn't. Oh, that's so beautiful, man. I love that so much. So the reason this is so cool to me is at one point I owned, there are 2 Toxo bombs, and I owned one of them, toxic time bombs. And Pat then found the other one. It's like a miracle. This is the one that Pat found. But it shows basically how this toy was going to work. So basically, it's just a little robot that just runs out and just spills pollution. Cobra would mail these off to G.I. Joe places or G.I. Joe bases or wherever, and just another way to pollute and cause, disruption throughout the world. So once again, talking with Vinny, he actually explained this idea to us, and that was a beautiful piece of news. So this was actually created by a designer at Hasbro. He was not a member of the G.I. Joe team, but he came up with this idea and pitched it to them. So this was like the one thing that he actually worked for on G.I. Joe. The team loved it. They made these models. They started to pitch the idea and to try to make this happen. But they got the idea from a Godzilla toy that was created by Tommy. And they had it was basically an egg. And Pat has it there on the wall behind him, actually, on his shelf. And it's an egg that you twist the knob, you twist the egg, and the egg cracks open, and a Godzilla monster. Who were the options? You said there were 3.
Yeah, this is not actually a Tomy product. This one actually is from Takara. And yeah, it is a line of Godzilla eggs. So they had Godzilla, they had Rodan, and this one is actually Ghidorah. I think the way that it kind of went is that they would often pitch ideas with the thought that they were going to license the patent from the patent owner. And the thing that they were not foreseeing is that this patent was going to be too expensive. And yeah, he did retell me that story, but it was fun. You got the exact same thing from Vinny.
Something that Vinny did tell me is that they couldn't actually get it to work. They were kind of got it to work, but they really couldn't get it to work to actually spill or shoot, because the other version has like a catapult arm. On that memo for Larry Hama, it talks about having a finger flick technology. So I guess it would run out, and then the child, after it stops moving, would flick the bucket and make it tip out.
So don't forget to go watch the video, though. It's on Articulated Points that gives you all the breakdown of the toxic time bombs.
All right, so then moving on, The last thing we have.
So, one other thing in 1991 that I thought was worth mentioning as I was looking over the Deke cartoon is that there were some G.I. Joe troopers, what we normally call green shirts, that appeared inside that cartoon as a part of a cleanup team. And naturally, they weren't figures. Deke probably designed these just to fill some things in. I thought that it was worth noting that there was a basic green shirt, or green vest as it is, and green helmet as the case here. A Deke green shirt eco warrior.
Philip here, interjecting on this last point. So it turns out this green shirt is actually a little more interesting than we first thought. Yes, Deke did still design it, but they actually have a history of creating green shirts as the needs suit them. Most well known is probably this version of the green shirt that reuses the Sunbow design, as seen in Operation Dragonfire, albeit with some tweaks to the original colors. But there are also other green shirts that show up from time to time to fill out those battle scenes. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but I've also seen this green shirt that looks a fair bit like Ambush, as well as this bizarre choice of Freefall's uniform in orange and pink. So what does this have to do with our Eco Warriors green shirt? Well, Patrick and I were looking back at this not too long ago when I realized the uniform is actually reusing the design from DEF Shockwave. The DEF episodes of Deke were from this same season, so the designs for their characters would already be available. It looks like Deke modified their Shockwave model to remove the nightmare-inducing face mask and gave it to a suitably Eco Warriors-ish repaint, which means it's actually pretty easy to customize one of these for yourself. While the animation model modified Shockwave's helmet, you can cut off that part in the actual accessory. But if you don't want to break out the blades, you can probably get by with Bulletproof's helmet. At any rate, through the magic of Photoshop, here's what Shockwave could look like with that face mask removed, and then recolored into the Deke green shirt design. Kinda makes me wish this colorway actually existed in the toys. Okay, that's just a quick update for you all, and now back to our story in progress.
Now, back to the conversation. I think it's time that we touched on this.
Once again, we mentioned that the packaging has to be created well before the toys. That they're working on them congruently at the same time. So they had to take a resin figure and paint it to look like how the manufacturer of the color changing paint basically implied it was going to work. So this is how they pictured in their head the toy was going to look. So they created this imagery and they put it on the packaging. Well, because it was on the packaging in 1991, they got a complaint lodged against them by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. Basically, it was this as well as their battle copters, because once again, the commercials had to be made before the toys were made as well. And the helicopters, they made the helicopters fly better than they could. They were basically hit for violating the law prohibiting unfair acts and practices and unfair methods of competition. So by putting a motor and using string on the helicopter, and then by over-exaggerating the amount of effect on that figure. In 1993, Hasbro was ordered to pay a civil penalty of $175,000, and provisions were designed to prevent Hasbro from engaging in similar deceptive and unfair acts in the future. Part of the fine also covered the misrepresentation of the battlecopters. So that $175,000 was not for one, is for both, actually. And because of that, that complaint was brought against them in 1991. Hasbro had to change its packaging art. So there's actually 3 types of packaging art that can be found for the change between 1991 and 1992. You have the figures that have that image of Toxo Viper before and after the color change. Then there is one where there is a black sticker over that imagery. And then the third version, which was in 1992, that imagery is gone completely. All right, so now we're going to move on to 1992.
Okay, and first up in 1992 is Barbecue.
So this figure, he makes sense to be a part of it because he's a firefighter. So I guess that's kind of environmental. He's already kind of doing the good work. But I don't know. This figure always just seemed like the odd man out to me when it came to the concept.
In a lot of ways, though, honestly, like what we were talking about earlier with a volcano jumper, this seems to be where that influenced the Eco Warriors the most in some ways. This Barbecue is very similar to that volcano jumper. The thing that's also maybe a little bit similar is the fact that his package art, he's actually coming in on that zip line.
Oh, yeah.
Which isn't a feature that's at all with the figure.
That's true. So as you can see here, this is the presentation art. There's black mask trim, and then there's some stuff about the file card. What was that on the file card?
Yeah, the file card mentions that he has a handy snap-off visor, and it also calls out an emergency access fire axe. And so those are things that I just kind of wanted to point out on the file card because it's odd to me. Here's the one-to-one painted resin that appeared in the 1992 Toy Fair catalog. Now, the barbecue that I got at retail whenever they were new, the mask comes off on it. I looked really closely. There's a spot that is maybe glue, but if mine had glue on it, it was very, very little. And so the mask can kind of be put on and taken off.
So I have the test shot, which we'll show later, I guess, but can't believe I'm about to do this.
Oh, don't then.
Yeah, mine doesn't come off.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Well, the one that I got at retail did. So here's a nice picture of his face where it came off relatively easily. But I think more interesting than that is the fact that it says that it comes with his emergency access fire axe. And that's just a bullet point on all of the things pointed out on the figure's card art on the file card because there is no axe pictured.
Well, I bet that was actually pointed out on the file card is because the two earlier renditions of barbecue comes with an axe. That's his main accessory.
Yeah.
So I bet you there were kids, they thought, well, everybody's going to ask where his axe is. So like, oh, it's in his backpack that they can't see. It's an emergency access axe.
But so far, I've not seen any indication that they ever intended this one to include one.
Yeah. So there's the test shot. Looks just like the one in my hand.
That's a good example of it being in mostly the correct colors, but then the upper arms and the elbows are not.
Yeah, I don't know why. It always reminded me of Christmas, the coloring with the green arms. I don't know why.
And here is an FEP of barbecue, and the color change paint that they originally had on him was red. So I can really see why they would have changed that to brown, because red was just never going to show up very well. It shows up on the yellow areas, but not so much on the rest of the figure.
Yeah.
And then I thought that it'd be a neat thing to bring up with barbecue. We talked earlier about that EnviroForce logo, and we also talked about the speed at which some of this stuff was happening.
Right.
While Ozone ended up in the Star Brigade as Ozone, whenever they used the barbecue figure for Star Brigade, he ended up in there as Payload because they didn't have the mold to the Payload figure that they wanted to release, so they just used barbecue to fulfill that instead. And the funny thing was, on the first couple Star Brigade figures that came out of Payload, it did not have any sort of tampograph on his arm. But the one that was released later in 94, in white, it did. And so Payload of Star Brigade has an EnviroForce tampo on his bicep.
That was a cut and paste error when communicating with China.
Yeah. Now we have Deep Six.
This is a biggie.
His file card says that he includes time variable aquatic hand grenades. Maybe there's a time aquatic hand grenade in that pouch of his on the vest.
His original concept name, though, was Torpedo. And all the art and everything we've come across, it was actually Torpedo. And why they changed it to Deep Six, I really don't know. But one thing that's interesting here is we have this concept art in pencil, and he is wearing a completely different outfit than what they ended up producing. And he's wearing a deep dive like suit with the built-in helmet that's attached to the torso, which is actually kind of similar to what Deep Six earlier versions, came with.
It is a little bit weird, though, that it looks like it was Torpedo when it was more of a pressure suit, but then whenever it went to more of a Frogman suit, it became Deep Six.
And so here's the face mask that came on that character. The main thing to point this out is it says Torpedo's mask. So as you know, Deep Six came with a companion animal named Finback, which was a bottlenose dolphin. But originally, Deep Six was proposed to come with a killer whale. So Vinny, once again, he shared with 3D Joe's a story about that killer whale. And here's what he said. He said that we needed to do a diver because we hadn't done one in a while. We thought it'd be cool to have a figure come with a killer whale. So we sculpted a killer whale. When it came time to do the presentation for the figure in a line review with executive staff, Alan Hassenfeld said, why a killer whale? Why don't you use a dolphin? Because Alan thought a killer whale was too mean, and a dolphin seems to be more related to the scientific experiments that they were doing to help communication with people because they're so smart or something like that. So anyway, R&D was not thrilled with the revision, but although Allen didn't do many edicts, this was one. So R&D sculpted a new dolphin. All the previous artwork had already been shipped to China, and the wires got crossed. So when the original Killer Whale color sheet was referenced in China to create the paint scheme for the dolphin, those carded figures were sent back to Hasbro as EPs for review. And Vinny was like, no, 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 no. This can't be a killer whale. We already told our boss we wouldn't do it. So a cool thing that has turned up, as you can see here, is this input drawing for Torpedo's killer whale. And this is actually an orca and not a bottlenose dolphin. It has a different face, and this is drawn at 2:1 scale. But when you cut it in half, when you do this, we convert the scale to actual production scale. This was going to be a centimeter or so, a little bit longer than a centimeter bigger than Finback actually was.
Yeah, that's great that a little bit of that reverting back to things, back to earlier parts of the design process, is the origin for this as well. But then here we have the resin of, I guess I should say Torpedo, because that's what the bag says, right?
Yes.
It also appeared inside the Toy Fair catalog. There's a resin, but his visor is cloudy, and I'm sure that they didn't intend on it being released that way. But whenever you're dealing with resins, it's very difficult to get them to be colored and clear, and so I would bet that that's the reason why it looks very cloudy.
And I have that resin. Sadly, I did not get a visor with it.
And then after the resin stage, here is Deep Six as a test shot. You have this as well, don't you?
I have that figure, and I have the killer whale. I didn't get the figure down because it's such a good picture, but this is my killer whale. And it actually has age spots. And somebody at Hasbro painted, my dolphin. I do apologize. It's not a killer whale. This is Finback. They painted his eyes red and his mouth red like bloody. It wasn't meant to be that way, but the rubber has absorbed the ink over time.
He looks like he's the marketing for The Dark Knight now.
Yeah.
Part of the marketing for that movie.
Yeah.
There's some other differences, though, between that test shot and the finished dolphin, right?
Yeah, so for whatever reason, they stamped for the manufacturer, the date, the COO, country of origin. So they did it right there, but for whatever reason, they did eventually move it up, put it up here. I don't know why.
I don't know. It just kind of looks to me like the difference is there for the sake of refinement. Certainly the oval on the bottom of his stomach looks a lot better than a huge rectangle with two big dimples in it. So it looks like they just kind of refined how it was, and in the process of refining it, needed to move where that country of origin stamp was going to be located.
Yeah.
But then here's some pictures of the carded killer whale, the black dolphin.
This is my pride and joy. It took me a very long time to finally get one of these.
But that's not where the interest ends, though, with Finback and the carded black killer whale versions, because there are two of those. Is that correct?
Yeah, so once again, going back to that lawsuit, in 1991, they knew they had to change their packaging, but they had already started making stuff. So that's why there are those transition packs where some of them have stickers, and then some of them have the imagery removed and it has text there instead. So like the one I have is actually the one with the color changing photo, but a mutual friend of ours has one like in this imagery here with the black background and the text.
I just want one. I'll be happy with one. I would point out that the picture did have a blurb on it that was a little bit different than they were in 1991, because they added the words simulation, actual effect may differ.
Oh, yes. Just right there, just above the image of the figures, they added that small text.
Yeah, so that's a little bit different than what it was in 1991, but I don't think that solution was going to appease the FTC, so they ended up getting rid of it altogether. Okay, Toxo-Zombie.
This is a cool figure because I like how they actually used the Toxo Viper. So like they show you that that Cobra's like, we don't even care. We'll turn our own figures into these mutants.
Yeah, the leaky soup brigade that was supposed to be a problem with the Toxo Vipers version 1 Apparently in 1992, we found out that those Toxo Viper 2 suits didn't work so well either. It'll be fine this time, I promise. That's what they told the troops.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting though that they changed it to pink.
It is, because he's clearly that sculpt, but if you look at the card art, the colors match the Toxo Viper from 91 almost perfectly.
Yeah.
I don't know, I guess in my imagination, whenever they dropped into the chemicals, it also just made the colors of their clothes change.
Yeah, there's a little bit of bleach in that in the hazardous waste. So.
Yeah, that's right. And then I do want to note that he does also have a bullet point on his file card that says that he includes a condensed limited range RS5 handgun. And of course, he doesn't have a handgun. Here are some images that we have of Toxo-Zombie from Kurt Groen. These were listed as Toxo-Zombie concepts. Maybe we should note the fact that in the file card for Toxo-Zombie, he's not like a traditional zombie that has risen from the dead, but the concepts here certainly imply the opposite, where he has the tombstone of Groen behind him.
Yeah.
But from there, we have the Toxo-Zombie resin, and it pretty much is as we are familiar with it. Next up is a test shot, and I did want to note that the sealed bagged test shot of Toxo-Zombie included a knife, because the Toxo-Zombie that we got here in the United States only came with the water squirter, but apparently at some point they considered including a knife. I don't know if they ever considered that handgun from the bullet point, but they did at least think about including some accessory with him.
Yep.
And then here is the FEP Toxo-Zombie that is bagged. I have held one of these in hand. I didn't end up buying it because I couldn't find anything significant about it other than the fact that it was bagged. There are no accessories in here. And thanks again to Drew Haggerty for that image. Sometimes on Toxo-Zombie, people don't notice that he actually does have that Cobra logo on his arm. I think it's because it's a sort of a purple on purple or pink on pink kind of color, but it is there. And talking about reverting, I have to wonder if that's what happened here, or if they were just trying to enhance this figure a bit, because when our Toxo-Zombie was released in China, apparently they did decide to include the backpack and gun from Toxo Viper.
So they made it more like an actual Toxo Viper that's now a zombie. So it's like the Toxo Viper accessories with the Toxo-Zombie?
Yeah, they were included.
Okay.
That brings us all the way to 1992's Eco Striker. I don't have a lot on the Eco Striker, do you?
I got nothing.
Really all we have is this early image from the Toy Fair catalog where it shows the Eco Striker with the red headlights.
Okay.
I thought that it was interesting that the sticker on the Eco Striker is that EnviroForce sticker, but now it says Eco Warriors instead.
Why they fixed it on the vehicle, but they didn't fix it on the 92 figures? I'm wondering if they just thought it's so small that nobody's going to notice.
And then I bust out the magnifying glass.
Right.
Yeah, you could be right. It may have even just been for consistency. I don't know. Or why didn't they just do a variant and
Right.
change it? I don't know. It's a good question. On the package, though, for the Eco Striker, Deep Six's gun kind of has the stock of it. Looks more like it's made for swimming, for aquatic use, similar to the one that came with Wetsuit later on.
Yeah, instead of being like a traditional stock up your shoulder, it's actually like a wavy fin, almost like a flipper.
Correct. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. But yeah, it's a little weird because that's actually how it is on Deep Six's art as well. So I wonder if out there somewhere there is a test shot or a sketch that would have indicated that that's how it was going to be made.
I don't know.
Amongst the test shots that I got this plunger test shot that Philip helped me compare to the one of the Eco Striker. Now, I don't have an Eco Striker to show a comparison to, so I just kind of have it here against the Toxo Viper plunger.
Well, you said you had nothing. Look at you. You lied.
I think this is very close to nothing. I think that's how people will feel.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And that brings us to what we kind of already started talking about before, the Toxo Lab.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we don't really have much to show for this. But this is the catalog photo shoot. What's cool about this is some of the colors are different. What else is cool?
It is picking up resin figures here, and yeah, the grabber arm has a little bit of orange on there, but there's not a ton that is different here. I would say that the more interesting Toxo Lab is the one that appears in the 1992 vehicle insert catalog.
Mm.
You can tell that it has been customized from various G.I. Joe vehicles, and I like to think that it kind of calls back a little bit to that earlier Arbco playset.
Well, you can definitely see that this right here calls back to when they were still using they still planned to use the concept of slime, not water, because that canister could hold slime.
Yeah.
The gun on the Sludge Viper looks like it has the bigger tip on the end, and it has a playmat underneath it.
Yeah, I think that the inclusion of a playmat is a good indication that there was supposed to be a small area where kids could get some slime on something and parents would be not quite as upset. I think the playmat is a key feature. It also says Arbco Plasma Tox on the top of the tank, the top of the playset, and on the playmat. So Arbco was definitely something included quite a lot on this. But you can actually see some different G.I. Joe parts in here. There's right there behind the Sludge Viper. If you look close, that corner is taken from the Tactical Battle Platform turret.
Okay.
The gripper arm, that's straight out of the Defiant.
Painted yellow.
I don't know why Clean Sweep is the one operating it, but that seat is actually from the Rolling Thunder.
Oh, that's cool.
And then down on the mat, I was able to spot that there's a Stellar Stiletto missile as well. I'm certain that there's probably some other things in here. I would love to see some comments from people who can identify things. You and I both had similar thoughts on the Plasma Talk container, but neither one of us were able to identify it.
So basically, when we both saw that, it reminded us of like a athlete's foot powder, or like just a drying powder for your feet. Like it just, with all those holes, it looked like baby powder or talcum powder or athlete's foot powder or something like that.
Who knows? Maybe it's a remnant of separating out the slime from the rocks.
You know, just speculating. But another thing that makes me think that this was part of the slime play feature is all that stuff that's scattered on the mat. You know, you could just see a kid encasing that in slime, like spilling slime on the mat, and like, oh, I can't use my gun now because it's covered in slime, you know, that type of thing.
Yeah, I enjoy seeing that. But then next up is this.
So we want to thank T.A. Smart for this. He purchased this off Facebook, and this is the test shot for the Toxo Lab playset.
Yeah, it's kind of neat because the ladders and the green parts are actually a darker green, and the orange parts are still orange, but then the other stuff is this bright pink. And to be honest, it all just kind of reminds me of the colors of the Toxo-Zombie.
Oh, you're right, it does. I could see that.
Yeah, and it's weird because the pink is kind of pink like the Toxo-Zombie, and the released one is kind of purple like the Toxo Viper. And it did make me wonder, you know, if this was an intended color and then maybe they changed it, but not with the art. The art kind of matches. Well, you know what's weird? Actually, if you look at the art, the green matches this green.
Yeah.
Rather than the green that it was released in.
But, I mean, it is a test shot, and it's quite common that the test shots will be produced in a plastic because it's a different color than what was going to be final production.
I just am trying to sort out whether or not it falls more in the category of test shot or more in the category of FEP, because maybe this was a proposed color for the playset.
So it could have been an EP.
Right.
And they looked at those colors and said, no, we picked purple number 42, not light purple number 12. You need to change it and send it back.
All right, that covers all the items released in the first 2 years. Join us next time when we'll pick up with a look at more canceled items, this time from 1992, as well as some items from Brazil and more. But for now, I'd like to thank Chris Murray and everyone who's helped with the Articulated Points Eco Warriors series.
Thanks for watching this episode of Articulated Points. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'd appreciate it if you would like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to learn more about some of the toys featured in this episode or want to follow us on social media, links are in the description below this video.